What's poppin', everybody? This is the cartoon kid, Ray Rollins, coming to y'all with another classic SpongeBob SquarePants review, man. Today, we're diving into Season 4, and we're doing Episode 9, Part 1, called The Krusty Towers. Now, before I start breaking this episode down, man, y'all know what I gotta do. I gotta give y'all that episode breakdown. This episode centers around our good old crab homie, Mr. Krabs, turning the Krusty Krab into a hotel after realizing that he can make a bunch of money after staying at a 5-star hotel when going to a fast food convention. Now, the main motto of the hotel was, just like the one that Mr. Krabs stayed at previously, it was, "We can never deny a guest, even at the most ridiculous request," or something of the sort. And SpongeBob and Squidward are, of course, along with the ride because, you know, they're former Krusty Krab employees. So now they're working at the Krusty Towers. The first guest that they actually have stay at the hotel was Patrick. And Mr. Krabs was basically telling Squidward that, yo, you gotta do whatever he says. You know, we can never deny a guest, even at the most ridiculous request. So Squidward has to carry up Patrick's luggage, which actually turns out to be a bag of rocks. He had to do other ridiculous things, such as peel the crust off his Krabby Patty, unclog the toilet, and I'm pretty sure there's some other things that I'm forgetting, but Squidward essentially says that, yo, I'm tired of this ish, man. I can't keep doing this. I quit. And now it's up to SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs to run the hotel by themselves. But Squidward says, you know what? I'm not just going to quit. I'm going to come back as a guest and show you how these working conditions were affecting me. So the remainder of the episode was Squidward coming back as a guest and giving Mr. Krabs these extremely ridiculous tasks to show him how working at the Krusty Towers and essentially abiding by the motto affected him. So there y'all have it. That is a nice broken down summary of the episode. Let's get on into my first impressions. As always, man, when I go through these classic episodes of SpongeBob and do these reviews, I like to think back to when I first seen the episode and compare my thoughts now to what they were then. As a kid, I loved this episode. And I know a lot of people in the SpongeBob, I guess you could say community or fandom or whatever the heck you want to call it, they're not fans of Season 4. They say that Seasons 1 through 3 are, you know, the golden era of SpongeBob, and essentially Season 4 starts the whole downtread of the series. And I can see why they say that, because Season 4 definitely has some head-turning episodes. But I also think Season 4 has a few good gems in there. And in my humble opinion, this is one of them. I'm not saying it's one of my top 10 favorite episodes of SpongeBob, but it's one episode that I enjoyed as a kid, and even watching it today, I kind of really enjoyed. Of course, I'm going to touch on that a lot later on in my review, but let me talk about some of my favorite moments that I had from this episode. Not going to lie to you, man, this was most definitely a comedy-centered episode. The first moment that I want to mention, or rather the first joke that I really got a kick out of, and even still till this day, was the whole scene where Squidward essentially had to carry Patrick's bags up to his room. And he sees Patrick take the elevator. And he was like, okay, let me go in here too. Mr. Krabs like, no, you gotta take the employee elevator. So Squidward's lugging this heavy, gigantic bag around. He goes to the employee, quote-unquote, elevator, which actually turns out to be this long flight of stairs. Okay, so Squidward carries his gigantic bag up these stairs, and he's like, yo, man, what's in your bag, bro? And he opens it up, and he sees a whole bunch of rocks in there. He's like, yo, why is your bag filled with rocks? And Patrick says, hey, I don't tell you how to live your life. For some reason, man, I just absolutely love that exchange. Squidward being, I don't want to say the villain, but he's definitely not a character that everyone enjoys from the series. He's definitely, I guess you could say, the party pooper. Or better yet, the grumpy old man. And whenever he ends up being at the shit end of the stick, it's always hilarious. And that's one thing this episode does great. It freaking puts Squidward in a position to where he is essentially, I wouldn't say taking L after L, but he gets shat on a lot at the beginning of this episode, doing these crazy tasks for Patrick at Mr. Krabs. I wouldn't say request, but rather demand. Now, the cool thing about this episode that I can see now, and that I really didn't take notice of when I was a kid, was that Squidward actually turned the tables on him. And instead of being the character who was getting crapped on, the writers put our squid homie in a position where he could finally take some W's and get back at Mr. Krabs. Which leads me to my second, and I guess you could say third moments of this episode. The second moment, or joke rather, that I really enjoyed was when Squidward told Mr. Krabs that he wanted a Krabby Patty with cheese, toenail clippings, and nose hairs. Oh, let's not forget, he wants it in under 5 seconds. SpongeBob, being the dope fry cook that he is, had it all made up in 5 seconds, got it to Squidward, and Squidward's like, okay, Mr. Krabs, now you gotta eat this. I don't want it, you gotta eat it. This is my request. SpongeBob whispers to Mr. Krabs, that's not actually a Krabby Patty with cheese, toenail clippings, and nose hairs. And Mr. Krabs like, oh, now I get you. And Mr. Krabs essentially tossed the patty down his throat, spit it all up, and we get to see that it almost is what Squidward wanted. It's just missing the cheese. Which was another good-ass, hilarious gag for me because Mr. Krabs definitely deserved it. The final moment that I enjoyed was when Squidward asked Mr. Krabs to make him some cookies, just like his mama used to make. And Mr. Krabs makes some homemade cookies, and, you know, they're not like his mom used to make. So Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob have to go to Squidward's mom to get her to make cookies for, you know, Squidward. They get to Squidward's mom's house, dressed in all black like they're gonna kidnap her to get her to make the cookies. And they ring the doorbell, she opens it, she says hi and all that good stuff. And you see SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs all dressed in black. Then we transition to SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs trying to shut the trunk. And here comes Mrs. Tentacles to shut the trunk of Mr. Krabs' boat. And this is where we find out that they were actually trying to put laundry in the trunk. When you really think about it, man, seeing SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs dressed up like that, and the whole scene where Squidward's mom acts surprised as all hell, you would have definitely thought that they put her up in that trunk and they were going to kidnap her and force her to make some cookies. It's good to know that she went willingly, man. And that's one thing that I always enjoyed about these SpongeBob episodes, especially the earlier ones, is they're always toting that line of dark humor. Because I don't think kidnapping someone and forcing them to make cookies should be in a kid's show. But you know what? SpongeBob definitely portrayed that image in this episode. Granted, they didn't kidnap anybody, but, you know, it sure looked like they did. And that was my 3 favorite moments of this episode. Now, let's slide into my final review. Like I said, man, this episode isn't in my top 10 favorite episodes of SpongeBob. Maybe it is, I don't know. I never actually sat down and made a list. But it's definitely in the most enjoyable episodes category of SpongeBob for me. The primary reason that I really enjoy this episode is that it's just comedy centered, man. Who doesn't like to put on a cartoon, especially if you're a kid? Who doesn't like to put on a cartoon and sit back and enjoy it and have a good few laughs? That's not the only reason I like this episode, though. I like this episode simply because, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I really enjoyed this episode because it took one of our, I guess you could say, most love to hate characters in Squidward, had him take a few L's at the beginning, trying to follow Mr. Krabs' motto for the Krusty Towers. But not only did it do that, it had Squidward turn the tables on Mr. Krabs and actually avenge himself on them L's and have Mr. Krabs take a few L's himself. And while us as OG SpongeBob fans, and hell, I guess you could even say some of the new ones, would love to see Squidward get shat on, you know, with the whole quote-unquote Squidward torture porn style episodes like Ink Lemonade. While we like to see Squidward take all these L's, I personally think it was pretty dope of the writers to put Squidward in a position to not only get shat on, but essentially turn it around on Mr. Krabs for essentially overworking him to death. And let's say hypothetically, someone just comes in and watches this episode for the first time. You know, they have no previous knowledge of SpongeBob. They don't know who Squidward is. They don't know anything about the characters. Yeah, maybe they can tell that Squidward may be a jerk from the first few scenes of the episode. But I guarantee you, once they see how Mr. Krabs is treating him and overworking him, I bet you anything they're going to find themselves rooting for Squidward throughout this entire episode. And that's something that doesn't happen very often for most SpongeBob fans. When can you sit here and tell me that You actually saw yourself really rooting for Squidward in the episode, or cheering him on in a sense. I don't think that's many episodes. Maybe the Ink Lemonade one could be understandable, but, you know, Squidward never took a W in that episode. He was just taking straight L's. But this episode does that really well. It takes one of the most love-to-hate characters of SpongeBob, puts him in a position where he's essentially getting crapped on by Mr. Krabs, and puts Squidward in the position to essentially turn it around and, you know, crap on Mr. Krabs in return and take some W's in this episode. But the most important thing is that this episode makes it 100% understandable on why Squidward's doing this. He's slightly doing it because it's in his nature, but he's primarily doing it to get back at Mr. Krabs for overworking him too much. And us as fans can truly cheer him on in a sense because it's understandable, man. Nobody should be treated like how Squidward was treated at the beginning of this episode. Another thing that I want to mention about this episode is the whole overall motto. We can never deny a guest, even the most ridiculous request. Now, granted, yeah, that's, you know, they did this in a hotel setting, but you can kind of even say that's true nowadays, especially nowadays, in the whole fast food industry. I remember doing a podcast with one of my friends a few months ago, and he used to work in a fast food restaurant in the early 90s. And he used to say that, man, we used to have sandwiches made up and ready to go. All we had to do is just give the customers their Big Mac and Whopper and send them on their day. Nowadays, though, you have people asking for no tomato, no lettuce, no this, no that. And that's understandable because of allergies and whatnot. But the truth is, it's kind of taking the fast out of fast food. And the motto of never denying the guest even the most ridiculous request kind of applies to that. Because you have some people ordering some ridiculous crap, man. And I'm sure a good amount of people watching this video and made it this far can say that, man, yeah, I definitely been in like a drive-thru and had to sit for a little bit just because this lady or dude in front of me had to order 9 bajillion things and had to have 9 bajillion different requests to their order. And sure, yeah, I'm definitely reaching here, but the motto definitely applies to the fast food industry today, just like it did with the hotels in this episode. And it also kind of painted a picture of how ridiculous some customers' requests may be. Obviously, they're not going to be to an extreme like they were in this episode. For instance, you're not going to have someone pull up to a McDonald's drive-thru and say, hey, let me get a quarter pounder and peel the crust off the bun. I don't think they're going to do that. They'll definitely take your tomatoes and pickles and whatnot off, but I don't think they're peeling off the crust on the bun for you, like Squidward did Patrick. So while fast food workers aren't going to be worked as strenuously as Squidward and Mr. Krabs were in this episode, they're definitely doing a lot more work than they should for working at a quote-unquote fast food restaurant. But anyway, I'm rambling on here. My final rating for this episode is a good 7.5 out of 10. I think that's pretty good. It's not anything too mind-blowing, but it's nowhere near a bad episode either. Like I said, this episode is a comedy-centered episode. It's good to have on your TV if you want to sit back, watch the cartoon, and have some good laughs here and there. But it's not too mind-blowing or mind-altering. It's something that you'll see on TV and be like, oh snap, it's this episode, and you'll watch it instead of changing the channel. So, overall, like I said, great episode, or well, not great, but good episode. 7 out of 10 will be my final rating for this episode. This has been my review for SpongeBob SquarePants Season 4, Episode 9, Part 1, Krusty Towers. This is the Cartoon Kid, Ray Rollins, man. Tell me what you think of this episode. Tell me if you liked it. Tell me if you hate it. Tell me what you would rate it. And as always, man, toss your opinions and future episode suggestions down in the comments box below. That's what it's here for. And until next time, I love y'all, and I'll see y'all when I see y'all. Peace out, everybody.